The first morning Elena Brooks stepped into the vast and echoing library of the Hale residence, she felt like a tiny dot swallowed by the polished marble floors, the towering bookshelves, and the silent authority that clung to every corner of the $85 million mansion. She had only been hired 3 days earlier and still moved with the careful light footsteps of someone terrified of getting fired before she even learned where the cleaning supplies were kept. Yet, despite her nerves, she was determined to do well, because this job mattered more than anything she had ever taken on. That morning, the sun spilled through the wide glass panels and turned dust motes into drifting gold, while the gentle hum of an autonomous cleaning robot glided beyond the rows of rare books, giving Elena a sense that the house itself held its breath as if watching her every move. She bent down to retrieve a fallen bookmark near the sofa, unaware that the robot had veered off its programmed path again, and by the time she straightened her balance, shifted beneath her feet, sending her tumbling forward through the stillness that had seemed so safe only seconds before. She did not even have time to exhale before she landed in the strong, unmoving presence of a man who felt like an unspoken storm, one she had heard about from the whispers among the staff, yet never expected to encounter so closely on her very first week. Nathan Hale sat on the Italian leather sofa with a tablet in hand, dressed in a simple black shirt that did nothing to soften the sharp, controlled lines of his posture, and when Elena collided with him, the device slipped from his grasp and hit the carpet with a muted thud. For a suspended heartbeat, her palms pressed against his chest. Her knees braced on either side of his legs, and her breath mingled with his in a fragile, trembling instant that felt too intimate, too shocking, and far too real for someone who had promised herself she would always stay invisible in this house. She expected him to shove her away, or bark an order, or recoil, as every rumor claimed he would, since Nathan Hale was known across all Malibu as the billionaire who avoided human contact, the man who lived behind his gates and refused to let the world touch him ever again. But instead of withdrawing his hands, moved with a startling instinct and wrapped firmly around her waist, steadying her as if that simple act cost him something, as if he were fighting an unseen ache while his eyes held hers with a depth that made her forget how to breathe. She felt the slow rise and fall of his breath, the impossible nearness of him, and though her mind screamed for her to get up, her body stayed frozen, as if captivated by the strange calm in his gaze, a calm she never expected from a man shaped by relentless scrutiny and betrayal. Then, in a voice low, rough, and almost wounded, Nathan whispered words that seemed to come from a place he never allowed anyone to see, words that were not a command but a plea that struck through the air and lodged into her racing pulse when he breathed out, "Do not you dare leave." Elena felt heat rush to her cheeks and scrambled to her feet, mortified that her very first interaction with her employer had turned into something so intimate and so utterly inappropriate, yet when she looked at him expecting fury, she found only a strange, searching stillness in the lines of his expression. He did not stand, he did not reprimand her. He simply watched her with an unreadable focus, as if he were trying to understand why her presence did not ignite the discomfort he usually felt around others, and Elena felt her breath catch as the weight of that possibility settled over her. She stammered apology after apology, her voice trembling as she backed away and retrieved the fallen tablet. Yet, despite her panic, she sensed something shift in the silent room, something unspoken and delicate, like the first stir of wind before a storm that both frightens and fascinates those who stand beneath it. Nathan remained seated, his gaze following her like a question he was not yet prepared to ask, and Elena felt the echo of that gaze long after she turned toward the hallway, her pulse still racing as she tried to convince herself that what happened had been nothing more than an accident. But even as she walked away from the library and into the brighter part of the mansion, she could still feel the warmth of his hands on her waist and the low, raw timbre of his whisper pulsing through her thoughts, a reminder that their brief collision had cracked open a moment neither of them understood yet. Both of them felt. She reached the end of the hall and pressed her hand to her chest, willing her heartbeat to settle, but the truth trembled inside her. This was more than embarrassment, more than a mistake, and though she could not explain why, she sensed that the fall had shifted something vast and irreversible between them. Outside, the ocean crashed softly against the Malibu cliffs, and the morning light moved across the windows like a silent witness to the moment that neither of them had intended, yet both would remember. And as Elena hurried toward her next task, she knew with a certainty that frightened her that her life had just changed forever. In the quiet that followed her footsteps, the memory of his touch lingered warm and unsettling, and though she tried to bury the sensation beneath her determination to remain professional, she could not shake the feeling that the billionaire who never let anyone near had allowed her closer than he intended, and that this was only the beginning today. Elena tried to focus on her next set of tasks, polishing the glass railing in the east wing, but her thoughts kept circling back to the library, to the moment she had collided with Nathan Hale, and most of all to the fact that he had not reacted the way every rumor about him insisted he would. She replayed it again and again as she dusted framed photographs, the ones not of people, but of landscapes and patents awards and early product launches, all arranged with meticulous symmetry, suggesting a man who preferred order over memory and silence over companionship. The staff had warned her on her first day that touching the owner even accidentally was grounds for immediate termination. Because Nathan Hale was known for avoiding physical contact to a degree most people considered extreme, and some whispered it was a psychological condition born from the scandals that had swallowed his life 2 years earlier. Elena remembered the way the housekeeper, a woman named Patricia, had leaned in with a hushed tone and told her never to stand too close to him, never to reach toward him, never to assume he was fine with proximity because he was not a man who let others inside his personal space. But Elena had broken that rule within minutes of him walking into the library on her shift, and instead of recoiling, he had held her as if the instinct to keep her there had overridden every boundary he had ever built for himself. The thought unsettled her so profoundly that she almost dropped the glass cleaner as she stared at her reflection in the polished surface, trying to understand why she, of all people, had been the one exception to a rule carved into the entire reputation of the Hale residence. While she worked, she caught glimpses of Nathan from a distance, wandering through the house with the quiet, purposeful stride of someone accustomed to controlling every environment he stepped into. Yet today he seemed slightly off-center, halting by doorways for a moment longer than usual, pausing near the living room as if listening to something, even though the house was silent. Elena ducked away whenever he passed by, a habit instinctive to her position and status. Yet each time she moved aside, she felt his gaze brush her shoulders the way a breeze might signal a shift in weather. Once, while she stocked the pantry, she overheard 2 security staff speaking in low voices. One saying he thought Nathan looked distracted, the other joking maybe the robot had almost run him over again. But there was an edge to their tone suggesting they were uneasy because Nathan Hale did not get distracted. When Elena finally stepped outside for a short break near the employee garden, she let the ocean air fill her lungs and thought about the article she had seen by accident the night before on her phone titled "What Really Happened to Nathan Hale," and beneath that headline a string of accusations, photographs taken without permission, videos leaked from private moments, and a former fiancé who had used his trust as currency in her rise to fame. The comments called him a recluse, a ticking time bomb, someone mentally unstable, and although Elena had not known him back then, she could see how the wounds from that media storm still clung to him, shaping the stiff way he carried himself, the guarded way he spoke, and the shadows in his eyes whenever someone stepped too close. She felt something stir in her chest, a quiet empathy she had no right to feel for a billionaire. She hardly knew yet. She could not help recognizing the loneliness threaded through his every movement, the kind that existed not because someone was surrounded by too few people, but because they had learned to expect betrayal from everyone. As she finished her break and returned inside, she noticed Nathan standing at the landing on the second floor overlooking the atrium, his hands gripping the railing as sunlight outlined the sharp edges of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, and the faint hollowness that lived in the space behind his expression. When he glanced down at her, there was no anger, no coldness, only something she could not name, curiosity, perhaps caution, maybe even confusion at the fact that her presence did not seem to trigger the discomfort she knew he experienced around others. He left without saying a word, but a few minutes later, while she restocked the supply closet, She realized the kitchen staff were buzzing because Nathan had done something entirely out of character. He had asked who brewed the morning coffee he drank, and when told it was Elena, he had simply replied, "Have her bring it to the library tomorrow." Patricia later pulled Elena aside, her eyes wide with disbelief, telling her in 30 years of managing this estate, never once had Nathan requested a specific staff member to step into his workspace, let alone brew something for him. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks and shook her head, insisting it must be a misunderstanding. Yet, deep down, she knew it was not because she remembered the way he had looked at her as she scrambled up from his lap. Not shocked, not irritated, but searching for something he did not yet understand. That afternoon, while she dusted the corridor leading to his private office, she sensed Nathan before she saw him, the subtle shift in the air, the sound of his controlled breath, and when he finally stepped past her, he paused just long enough to speak without turning his head, saying in a quiet, measured tone, "Thank you for earlier," before continuing on with the same calm precision as though he had not just said something that made her heart stumble in her chest. She did not know what he was thanking her for, not truly, but she felt the meaning lingering in the silence between them. Gratitude for not recoiling, perhaps, or for not apologizing in a way that made him feel broken, or maybe simply for not treating him like a man defined by the cruel headlines that once tried to end him. Later, as she polished the floors outside his bedroom, she found him standing near the window, watching the Pacific with his hands folded behind his back, and though she kept her head lowered, she could feel his attention drift to her again. Not heavy, not invasive, but thoughtful, as if trying to unravel the foreign warmth she seemed to bring into a world he kept locked behind steel gates and unspoken rules. That evening, when the shift ended, Elena walked through the service hallway with the unsettling sensation that the isolation surrounding Nathan Hale was not impenetrable after all, that somewhere beneath all the distance he kept from others, a small, unguarded part of him had turned toward her in spite of his own fear. And though she knew she needed to forget the morning in the library and the way he had whispered, "Do not you dare leave her mind," could not release it because, for a man who hated being touched, those 4 words said more about his wounded heart than any headline ever had. Elena woke the next morning determined to shake off the strange pull she felt toward Nathan Hale as she tied her hair back and adjusted the crisp uniform that marked her as one of many staff members in the sprawling mansion perched over the Malibu cliffs. She reminded herself that whatever had happened between them the day before had been an accident, a moment of proximity that should never have occurred again, and that her job depended on keeping professional distance from a man whose world was far removed from hers. Yet, as she walked toward his office with the morning tea he had specifically requested her to bring, she felt that same quick flutter in her chest, the one she tried so hard to ignore as she paused outside the door, inhaling slowly before knocking. When she entered, Nathan barely looked up from the sleek monitors spread across his desk, but his tone held a softness that contradicted the cold exterior he had shown the world for years when he said, "You can leave it there, Elena." Hearing her name in his voice felt unexpectedly intimate, and she hurried to set the tray down, keeping her gaze averted before stepping back, but as she turned, Chase, the golden retriever who roamed the house as freely as sunlight, trotted in through the half-open door, his tail wagging with uninhibited joy. Chase nudged her leg, then bounded behind her, sending her stumbling forward, and once again fate, or something far more reckless, collided her path directly into Nathan, who rose from his chair at the exact moment she lost balance. For the second time in 2 days, her hands braced against him and his arms instinctively came up to steady her. His touch warmed through the thin sleeves of her uniform, while his breath caught softly as though even he could not believe this was happening again. Elena froze, mortified, as the heat from his chest seeped through her palms and the subtle scent of cedar and ocean air enveloped her, making the room feel much smaller than it was. Nathan's fingers tightened just slightly at her elbows before he abruptly stepped back as if the realization of their closeness hit him too hard, too fast, and she stumbled again, this time finding her footing only because his hand reached out once more, catching her with a hesitation that revealed the war inside him. He withdrew quickly, his jaw tense and his breathing uneven as though he was ashamed of the instinct to touch her even when he needed to steady her, and Elena's heart twisted at the silent contradiction in his movements. "I am so sorry," she whispered, but he shook his head with a restraint that seemed to cost him effort, saying, do not apologize." There was a rawness in his voice that had not been there before, and when their eyes met she saw something flicker, something like fear intertwined with longing, and she felt the air shift between them again, heavy with the unspoken. After a moment he added more quietly, "Just do not disappear," his gaze lingering a second longer before he turned away as if the words had escaped him against his will. Elena retreated from the office, her thoughts spiraling as she tried to make sense of the way he had both pulled her close and pushed her away in the same breath, and for the rest of the morning she moved through the mansion with an uneasy awareness that the boundary between them had thinned in ways she did not fully understand. Yet, Nathan's actions continued to unravel her attempts to convince herself the moment meant nothing, because hours later, Patricia approached her in the staff corridor, holding a new list of tasks that looked noticeably different from the ones Elena had been assigned before. "He wants you to reorganize the library," Patricia said, her voice tinged with surprise, "and maybe come in earlier tomorrow to deliver his morning tea." Elena tried to hide her confusion, but it swirled inside her because Nathan Hale was not the kind of man who adjusted routines, certainly not for someone who worked anonymously in the background of his tightly guarded life. As she entered the library, the room that had been the site of her first chaotic tumble, she felt a tremor move through her, remembering the feel of his hands around her waist and the way his whisper had cracked open something between them that neither of them seemed prepared to face. She began sorting through the shelves, keeping busy to quiet her unruly thoughts while Chase sprawled nearby, watching her with canine contentment. Occasionally, she sensed Nathan's presence from the corridor, a shadow moving across the glass wall reflections of his purposeful stride as he passed by more often than he had any practical reason to. Once he paused at the doorway, and Elena looked up just in time to see the faintest shift in his expression, a look that hovered between wanting to speak and choosing silence before he walked away again, leaving her with a heart that thudded too loud in the quiet. Later in the afternoon, she made her way to the archive room to retrieve a missing ledger, but as she rounded the corner she nearly collided with Nathan again, standing there with the same startled look she felt on her own face. For a beat, neither moved, and Elena could almost hear his restrained inhale as if the simple act of standing this close to her tested every wall he had built to keep himself from feeling too much. She stepped aside quickly, murmuring, "Excuse me," while he nodded stiffly. Yet his gaze lingered in a way that suggested something deeper, something he had not yet allowed himself to name. Chase chose that moment to burst in, spinning happily around Nathan's legs before bumping into Elena once more, and the soft impact jolted her forward, her hand brushing against Nathan's as both reached down to steady the dog. Their fingers grazed just briefly, but the reaction was immediate, unmistakable. Nathan flinched lightly, yet did not pull away the way the rumors said he always did. Instead, he held still as if absorbing the feeling, his eyes darkening with a confusion that made her breath hitch before he cleared his throat, stepped back and let his hand fall to his side. Elena withdrew as well, turning quickly to distract herself with smoothing Chase's fur, while Nathan stood silent, watching her with an intensity he did not voice. When she finally glanced up, she caught him looking at her, not with irritation or discomfort, but with something that almost resembled recognition, as though he was beginning to understand that her presence stirred something in him he had not let himself feel for years. As the sun began to lower over the coastline, Elena finished her shift with a heart tangled in questions she could not bring herself to ask because each accidental touch, each proximity that neither of them had planned was beginning to weave a fragile connection that felt dangerous, unfamiliar, and undeniably real. And though she told herself she must stay away, keep boundaries, hold professionalism, she knew that something had already changed, that Nathan Hale, a man who hated being touched, was now reaching for steadiness only she seemed to bring, even if neither of them could admit it yet. Elena moved through the quiet halls the next morning with a sense of purpose she hoped would drown out the lingering memory of every moment she had shared with Nathan Hale, moments she knew she should forget, yet could not seem to erase, no matter how firmly she told herself that a billionaire like him existed in a reality far from hers. She carried a small stack of folded linens toward the upper level when she heard faint movement behind the partially open door of his home office, and though she tried not to pay attention, she could not ignore the strained sound of someone exhaling as if fighting exhaustion. When she stepped closer, she saw him through the gap illuminated by the pale morning light, sitting at his desk, shoulders hunched over multiple screens as his fingers pressed hard against his temples. His posture was rigid, but beneath it she sensed something frayed, a weariness she had not noticed until now, and the sight of it tugged softly at her chest as she continued down the hallway, determined to stay invisible. Hours passed as she completed her tasks, dusting the curved staircase, wiping the chrome fixtures, polishing the framed patents outside the tech lab wing, and every so often she spotted Nathan moving between rooms with a haunted distraction that sharpened her awareness of him even when she wished it would fade. Late that evening, after most of the staff had clocked out, Elena stayed behind to finish the final rounds of tidying, checking each room for misplaced cups or open blinds when she found herself outside Nathan's private study, the door slightly ajar, the lamp still glowing from within. She hesitated, unsure if she should knock, but duty tugged her forward, and she pushed the door open with quiet care, only to freeze when she saw him slumped over the glass desk, his head resting against one arm, the other hand still loosely wrapped around a pen as if he had fallen asleep mid-sentence. The soft pools of light from the overhead fixture cast tired shadows under his eyes, and his breathing held the uneven rhythm of someone who had not known true rest in months. Elena's instinct urged her to step back out of the room, leave him to his solitude. But another part of her, a gentler, braver part, could not walk away from the raw vulnerability exposed before her. Slowly, she approached, placing the linens down and reaching for the soft throw blanket draped across the back of a nearby chair, the one she had arranged neatly only that morning. Her movements were cautious, respectful as she lifted the blanket and draped it lightly across his shoulders, careful not to touch him, directly aware of the boundary she could not cross no matter how much compassion tugged at her. Yet, as the fabric settled over him, Nathan stirred, his breathing shifting, and Elena stepped back instantly but not quickly enough because his eyes opened with a slow, heavy blink and found her standing at the edge of his desk, her hands still mid-motion. The first flicker in his gaze was confusion, the second was something deeper, a mix of vulnerability and disbelief that made her feel as though she had accidentally seen a part of him he never meant to reveal. His voice was quiet, rough from fatigue when he finally spoke, saying, "Why are you kind to me?" The question startled her not because of the words themselves, but because of the earnestness beneath them, a stripped-down sincerity she had never heard from him before. She swallowed, felt her pulse jump in her throat, and answered before she could second-guess herself, because no one else is. The silence that followed stretched between them, warm and trembling, and she watched the tension in his jaw loosen just subtly, his eyes softening as if her answer had reached a place he kept locked beneath layers of caution. He sat up slowly, adjusting the blanket without removing it, and looked at her in a way that made her breath catch, as though he were memorizing her presence, trying to understand why she felt different from the world that had betrayed him so thoroughly. "You do not have to stay," he murmured, but there was no dismissal in his tone, only a quiet resignation that told her he was not used to anyone offering him comfort without wanting something in return. "I know," she replied, "but I wanted to." Nathan's expression shifted again. The faintest crack in the cold, controlled mask he wore for the world, and for a fleeting moment she saw the man beneath the armor, not the billionaire, not the recluse, but someone tired, someone hurting someone, surprised that anyone would care enough to place a blanket over his shoulders. He looked down at his hands, flexing them once as if recalling the instinctive way he had reached for her in the library, and again when Chase had knocked her off balance, and she realized then that every accidental moment between them had unsettled him, not because of discomfort, but because it had awakened something long buried. After a quiet beat, he spoke again, his tone softer than she had ever heard. "You should not worry about me, Elena. You are my employer," she replied quietly. Concern is part of the job. But even she knew that was not the truth, not entirely, because something in his exhaustion had pulled at her heart in a way she could not rationalize. Nathan lifted his gaze back to hers, and for a dizzy second she felt the weight of him, the intensity that had startled her from the first moment they collided, yet tonight it was gentler, careful, even hesitant. He seemed on the verge of saying something else, but instead he exhaled and leaned back, letting the blanket settle around him like a shield he had not expected to need. "You can go now," he said eventually, though his voice held a strange reluctance, as if he was giving her permission he himself did not want her to take. Elena nodded and turned toward the door, feeling the warmth of the room behind her, the fragile connection that flickered like a candle flame, refusing to die even in the draft of uncertainty. And as she walked back down the dim corridor, she felt the change as clearly as the quiet beneath her footsteps, a shift, subtle but undeniable. The first crack forming in the walls Nathan Hale had spent years building around himself. Walls she never meant to touch but had somehow begun to break simply by seeing him as a man, rather than the legend the headlines made him out to be. The next morning, the atmosphere inside Hale residence felt strangely heavier, as though the walls themselves sensed the shift happening beneath the surface of its routines. Elena moved quietly through the kitchen, picking up the day's assignments, when she noticed the sudden hush among a group of staff members huddled near the island, their faces lit by the glow of a phone screen. She did not intend to listen, but a sentence drifted toward her sharp enough to make her pause. "It has started again," they whispered. "The headlines are back." Another voice muttered, "Poor Mr. Hale, he can never escape it." Elena stepped closer cautiously until Patricia turned her phone, slightly revealing a breaking news alert from a popular media outlet, bold letters screaming allegations that Nathan Hale had once again abused power within his company, manipulating employees and suppressing voices. A fabricated narrative she could already sense twisted from fragments of a scandal she barely understood. Her stomach tightened with unease. Before she could process what she was reading, the room fell silent as Nathan himself walked through the doorway, his presence so commanding that even Chase halted mid-tail wag. Nathan's face was carved from stone, his jaw locked, his gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the whispers or the screens quickly flipped upside down. Elena saw the tension in every line of his body and the storm he carried behind the calm facade. Without breaking stride, he left the kitchen and vanished down the hallway toward his office, leaving behind a suffocating silence that lingered long after he disappeared. Elena felt something tighten inside her chest, a protective pull she could not explain. By midday, the headlines had multiplied across every online platform, fueling speculation and reviving old accusations with fresh hostility. The staff whispered behind closed doors, some pitying, some fearful, others cruelly amused by the fall of a man who seemed too powerful to break. She overheard two gardeners speaking near the atrium saying, "I bet he did it this time. Two rich men always think they can get away with everything." Another voice added, "People like him deserve to be taken down." Elena felt heat rise behind her eyes, not from anger for herself, but for him, because she had seen the exhaustion in his posture, the loneliness in his expression, the quiet unraveling beneath the armor he tried so hard to maintain. She knew he was not the monster the headlines painted, and hearing strangers reduce him to a caricature struck something raw in her. That afternoon, she was organizing towels outside the gym when she heard raised voices inside the hallway beyond the glass. A few junior staff members were gossiping loudly, unaware that their words echoed across the tiles. "I heard he threw a chair at someone once," one said. "No," the other replied, "he paid off half the company to stay silent." Elena felt a spark of indignation she did not know she possessed, and before she could second-guess herself, she stepped forward saying, "You do not know him." The group turned, eyes widening because the new maid never spoke up. She continued firmly, "What you are saying is not true. You do not get to talk about him like that." They blinked, surprised, then murmured something dismissive before scattering. But the trembling in Elena's hands did not fade because she knew Nathan had been standing behind the frosted door the entire time. She felt his presence before she saw him, and when the door opened, she met his eyes, a gaze filled with an emotion she could not name, something like shock mixed with an almost painful gratitude. Nathan said nothing at first, but his jaw tightened, and for a moment she feared he might be upset she had spoken for him. Instead, his voice came low, steady, and shaken. "You do not know what you are protecting." His words echoed the bruised core of a man who had been wounded by betrayal so deeply he no longer believed anyone could defend him without ulterior motives. Elena swallowed her nerves and replied because someone should. His breath caught subtle yet unmistakable, as though her simple sentence had struck a place in him untouched for years. He turned away briefly, hands bracing on the doorframe before he spoke again, this time softer. "I cannot let you get hurt because of me." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. "I am not hurt," she said gently. "I am upset because they are wrong about you." Nathan's shoulders rose and fell with a slow, conflicted breath. He looked like someone standing on the edge of a confession, but the words refused to move past the walls he had built around his past. After a long beat, he whispered, "Elena, you do not understand, and I cannot tell you everything." She stepped closer, only a fraction distance, still respectable, yet enough to let him feel she was not retreating. "Then let me try," she said. His eyes softened for a fleeting second, then hardened again with quiet anguish. "The truth is ugly," he murmured. She held his gaze, unflinching. "Ugly does not scare me." For a moment, the world outside the gym fell away, and all Elena saw was a man drowning in a history he had never been allowed to escape. Nathan finally straightened, no longer leaning on the frame, but carrying the same grief that had carved itself into every part of him. "It is not safe for you to be near me when the world turns like this," he said. But even as he spoke the words, he did not step back. Elena knew then he was torn between wanting to protect her and wanting her to stay. She lowered her voice. "Then trust me to decide whether I should be here." Nathan exhaled slowly, a crack of vulnerability sliding through the armor. He did not answer her plea, not directly, but the silence that followed felt like permission, the kind given not through words, but through the absence of retreat. Later that evening, as Elena passed through the living room, she found Nathan standing near the windows looking out over the ocean, the flicker of city lights reflecting against the glass. His posture was tense, his eyes distant, as though he was confronting ghosts no one else could see. She approached carefully, not wanting to intrude, but unable to walk past him without acknowledging his pain. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. He did not turn around as he answered in a voice that sounded like it had been scraped raw. "The past never stays buried, Elena." She wanted to touch his arm, offer something tangible, but she stayed still, honoring the boundary he still clung to. Even so, her presence alone made the air ease, fractionally, shoulders softening just enough for her to know he felt it too, the pull neither of them dared to name. And as she walked away, she realized this was not merely scandal, this was a wound that hunted him. A wound her compassion had accidentally begun to touch. Night settled heavily over Hale Residence, the kind of coastal darkness that seemed to swallow the mansion's edges, leaving only pockets of warm interior light glowing faintly behind glass. Elena finished her shift, late, her body tired, but her mind pulled taut with worry for Nathan, whose silence throughout the day had felt like a storm waiting behind locked doors. She told herself not to go looking for him, not to cross boundaries, not to involve herself in the emotional gravity of a man whose world was too complicated, too dangerous for someone like her. But as she passed by the gym, she heard a dull thud followed by another. Then a sharp exhale ripped through the thick quiet. She froze, her heart jerking before instinct guided her hand to push the door open just enough to see inside. Nathan stood alone in the center of the room, fists taped, knuckles raw. His breath ragged as he drove punch after punch into the heavy bag, swinging with each impact. Sweat drenched his shirt, clinging to his shoulders, and his expression was carved from desperation and fury and pain, all tangled into something that made Elena feel like she was witnessing a man breaking in real time. "Nathan," she whispered, but he did not hear her, or perhaps he did and chose not to respond as he struck the bag again with a force that rattled the chains above. Elena stepped inside quietly, her voice steadier this time. "Mr. Hale." He paused, mid-swing, shoulders rising and falling in harsh, uneven breaths before turning just enough for her to see the strain in his eyes, the kind that came from holding too much inside for far too long. "You should not be here," he said, his voice sharp but trembling underneath. "I do not want you to see this." Elena approached slowly, her steps soft across the padded floor, her gaze never leaving him, "You are hurting," she said gently. Pain splintered across his features as though her words exposed something he had fought to hide. "This is not your concern," he muttered, but his voice cracked at the edges, betraying him. She took another step closer, keeping a respectful distance while letting her presence speak in ways she did not yet dare to touch. Nathan pressed his forearm against the bag, leaning into it as though the pressure alone kept him from falling apart. His knuckles dripped blood, small smears darkening the leather. Elena drew a quiet breath, that ache in her chest tightening. "Nathan, you are bleeding." He laughed softly, but it was not amusement. It was something brittle, almost empty pain. "Does not matter," he whispered, "not compared to everything else." She hesitated, torn between stepping forward and letting him keep his walls. But something inside her, stronger than fear, said he should not face this alone. She moved just one step closer, enough for her voice to reach him without echo. "Tell me what happened," she said softly. Nathan kept his back toward her, shaking his head as though the truth was too heavy to drag into the open. "You want the truth." The words were low, restrained, dangerous, not to her, but to himself. "The truth is, I am not afraid of being touched, Elena." He turned then slowly, as if admitting this cost him something vital, and when his eyes met hers they were filled with something raw, untamed. "I am afraid of losing control." She did not flinch, she did not step back, she simply waited, her heartbeat pounding in sympathy. He exhaled, a shaky breath, bracing his hands on his knees, the fight draining from him, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "My fiancée," he began, then swallowed hard, as though the word itself tasted like betrayal. "She sold parts of my private life, leaked photos, messages, therapy, notes. She was the one person I trusted, the only one I ever let close." He lifted his gaze, his voice barely audible when he added, "She weaponized my vulnerability." Elena felt her breath catch, astonishment, heartbreak, and understanding colliding in her chest. She whispered softly, "Nathan, I am sorry." He shook his head, anger flickering not at her, but at himself. "I should have seen it coming. I should have known better. Trusting her ruined everything. And now, these headlines—" He gestured vaguely toward the world beyond the gym. "They are just pieces of that past coming back to drag me under again." For the first time, Nathan Hale looked not powerful, not unreachable, but human, deeply, painfully human. Elena's voice trembled, but stayed steady enough to say, "You are allowed to break, Nathan. You are allowed to feel this." He stared at her, the tension in his shoulders shifting as though her words reached a place he thought was long dead. Then something in his expression softened and he whispered, "Why is it only you?" The question hung suspended in the air, fragile and electric. Elena took a breath, her hand lifting before she could stop it, and she reached out slowly, giving him every opportunity to step away. She touched his hand lightly, the barest whisper of skin against skin. Not a demand, not a rescue, simply presence. Nathan's breath hitched, but he did not flinch, did not retreat. Instead, he looked down at their hands as if the simple contact cracked a door he had sealed shut for years. Her touch was gentle, warm, grounding in a way that made his eyes close for one brief, aching moment. When he opened them again, his voice was softer than she had ever heard. "Do not pity me, Elena." "I do not," she replied. "I see you." His jaw tightened, emotion surfacing hard enough to trace across his features. "No one has seen me in a long time," he murmured. Elena held his gaze, her thumb brushing the edge of his bandaged knuckle so carefully it felt like a promise. "You deserve to be seen." Nathan inhaled a slow, unsteady breath as though absorbing the weight of her words. The gym filled with a deep quiet, the kind that made everything else fall away until it was only them standing close enough to feel the tremors of each other's breath. Finally, he whispered almost to himself, "I do not know how to feel anything without hurting someone." Her voice was steady even as her heart pounded. "Then let me help you learn slowly." Nathan stared at her. something inside him unraveling a fraction, releasing the tight coil of pain. And for the first time since she met him, he did not hide, he did not step back. He simply allowed her to stay there with him in the broken pieces of a night he could not face alone. A thick fog rolled in from the ocean that night, wrapping Hale residents in a muted haze, and by the time the sun dipped fully behind the horizon, the mansion felt suspended in an otherworldly quiet, the kind that made every sound sharper, every breath more noticeable. Elena finished her evening rounds checking windows lights and room temperatures when suddenly all electricity cut out with a soft pop, plunging the entire estate into darkness. The emergency generators usually kicked in instantly, but tonight even they lagged, leaving only the distant crash of waves and the faint hum of wind against glass. Elena's heart jumped, but she steadied herself, remembering the staff protocols. She grabbed a small flashlight from the hallway cabinet and began walking through the corridors to ensure none of the older employees were startled. Her beam cut gentle arcs through the darkness, illuminating framed photos, patent certificates, the polished hardwood floor, and the long shadows stretching ahead like something alive. When she turned a corner leading toward the west wing, a soft sound made her freeze, not threatening but familiar. A quiet exhale caught in the dark. She lifted the flashlight and the beam spilled across a tall figure standing motionless near the end of the hall. Nathan. The light caught his face just enough to reveal a subtle sheen of strain beneath the composed exterior, the kind of tension that came from a day far too heavy to bear alone. He did not speak at first, and neither did she, the silence between them thick with everything unspoken since the night in the gym. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, keeping her voice low so it would not echo. Nathan stepped closer, his movements slow as if testing the air around him. "I am fine," he answered, but his voice carried a thin tremble he could not hide. "The outage is temporary," she said gently. "I am checking on the staff." Nathan hesitated, then said, "You should not wander in the dark alone." His concern surprised her, warming something deep inside her that she had tried to smother under professionalism. She smiled faintly, lifting the flashlight. "See, I have this." Nathan's gaze lingered on her illuminated face, then dropped for a moment as though struggling with something internal, before he whispered that light is distracting. The statement confused her until she realized the reflection must have been too bright for his already exhausted eyes. She lowered the beam, and the hallway dimmed again, only the pale glow of the coastline seeping through the distant windows. Their world shrank to the soft halo of light around their feet. Nathan took a slow step forward, closing the distance until Elena could hear the uneven cadence of his breathing. The darkness softened him. Somehow, stripped away the sharp edges of power, wealth, and control, leaving only the man beneath, fragile and searching. He looked at her, not like an employer, not like a billionaire, but like someone who had spent years alone in silence and did not know how to reach out without breaking something inside himself. "Elena," he murmured her name, trembling slightly on his tongue as if it carried weight he did not want to examine too closely. She felt her pulse quicken, her fingers tightening around the flashlight. "Yes." His jaw flexed once, twice, before he whispered, "I do not know how to be near someone without feeling like I am doing something wrong." "You are not hurting me," she said gently. Nathan's eyes drifted down as though absorbing her reassurance, and when he lifted them again, something in the darkness shifted the air, thickening between them until she felt it press against her skin. He reached out slowly, not touching her, but letting his hand hover near her cheek, a silent question trembling in the inch of space between them. His breath brushed her skin when he whispered, "If I touch you, will you run?" Elena's heart hammered, but she did not move. She did not retreat. She did not breathe. Her silence became its own answer. Nathan inhaled hard, a broken, beautiful sound, and his fingertips grazed her cheek so lightly she could not tell if it was actual contact or the ghost of one. He stepped closer until the space between them closed like a door swinging shut, and his forehead lowered toward hers, stopping just short. In the dimness, she felt the warmth radiating from him, the tremble in his breath, the quiet plea hidden beneath every inch of restraint he tried to maintain. "Elena," he murmured again, softer now, almost reverent. She tilted her head just slightly toward him, her breath catching as tension wound tight inside her. Nathan leaned in the final fraction and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost hesitant, the opposite of what she imagined a man like him capable of. There was no dominance, no urgency. Only a fragile, careful, aching tenderness that felt like he was trying to remember how to feel something without breaking it. His hand hovered at her waist, not gripping, not pulling, simply existing there as if the act of touching her at all was a miracle he did not trust himself to hold too tightly. Elena felt her knees weaken, her heart surge as the kiss deepened just enough to let emotion seep through the cracks in both of them. Nathan's breath shuddered softly against her lips, as though the intimacy terrified him even while he leaned into it helplessly drawn. Then, just as suddenly, he tore himself away, stepping back like he had been burned. His chest rose sharply, his eyes wide with conflict and panic swirling behind them. "This cannot happen," he said hoarsely, his voice cracking. Elena's breath trembled, but she stayed rooted, unable to speak past the rush of emotion flooding her. Nathan shook his head again, backing away further until the dim light no longer outlined his form clearly. "I cannot be the man who hurts you," he whispered, the words carved from anguish. "You are not hurting me," she tried to say, but her voice came out barely audible. Nathan looked at her with devastation etched across his features, as though he believed allowing himself to feel anything for her was the beginning of inevitable ruin. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Elena standing alone, her heart racing with both wonder and heartbreak, tears slipping silently down her cheeks because the kiss had felt like a beginning, but his retreat had felt unmistakably like an ending. Morning arrived with a strange stillness that felt nothing like the chaotic night before, and Elena moved through the mansion with careful steps, her thoughts looping around the kiss she wished she could forget but could still feel like a lingering warmth along her lips. She had slept barely at all, replaying every second of the moment he pulled away, telling herself it meant nothing. It should mean nothing, because Nathan Hale was a world she did not belong to, and whatever she felt was a mistake she must bury deep before it consumed her. But the universe did not allow her that comfort. The first sign that something was wrong came when she reached the kitchen and found Patricia staring out the window, her face pale, her hands trembling just slightly as she gripped her phone. "Look," she whispered, showing Elena the screen. A swarm of men with cameras crowded the iron gates of Hale residence, shoving against them, shouting questions held back only by the private security team struggling to maintain order. Elena blinked, confused, until Patricia added, "Someone leaked a rumor that you are involved with him." Elena's breath vanished from her lungs. "What?" Patricia nodded grimly. "Apparently a shareholder went public this morning saying Nathan is favoring a housemaid. They think you are sleeping with him to get influence." The words hit Elena like a physical blow, stealing her balance. Her chest tightened, her ears buzzed, and heat crawled up her neck. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Not even a denial, because the truth of what happened last night still burned too close, too fragile to touch. Before she could recover, Chase barked loudly, sprinting through the doorway toward the foyer, followed by another guard rushing past, muttering, "They are pushing in closer, stay inside." Elena's instincts told her to hide, to disappear, but she needed air, clarity, anything to stop the panic rising inside her. She stepped outside through the side door onto the gravel path toward the staff parking area, hoping the security perimeter remained far enough. But the moment she reached the open space, she saw them. The paparazzi had surged along the outer road, cameras raised lenses like weapons, snapping rapidly as soon as they spotted movement. "That is her someone," shouted the maid. Lena staggered backward, fear punching through her. "I am not involved with him," she tried to say, but her voice drowned beneath the barrage of shouted accusations. "Are you living with Nathan Hale? Are you being paid? Did you seduce him? Did he force you?" Elena shook her head, trembling, trying to retreat, but two photographers stepped off the curb, blocking her path, their cameras shoved inches from her face. "Please, stop," she said, trying to push past, but panic constricted everything inside her, making her steps stumble. The chaos swelled, crushing, suffocating, and she felt herself slipping into the same helpless fear she used to feel as a child when too many voices screamed at once. Then suddenly, everything stopped. Arms wrapped around her firm and unyielding, pulling her behind a broad shield of protection, and a familiar voice cut through the frenzy with sharp, commanding force. "Get back!" Nathan's voice. The crowd's shouting faltered long enough for Elena to realize he had come running from inside the house without a jacket, his hair still damp from the shower, as though he had sprinted the moment he heard the commotion. He positioned himself between her and the cameras, his body blocking every angle, his hand gripping her arm, not roughly but with a desperation that trembled against her skin. "Do not touch her," he warned the photographers, his tone low, dangerous enough to make even the boldest step back. Security rushed in finally, forming a barrier, pushing the crowd away while Nathan kept her close, shielding her as though she were the only thing in the world that mattered. Elena felt herself shaking uncontrollably, the adrenaline sharp enough to make her knees weaken, but Nathan's arm tightened around her, pulling her closer until her forehead brushed lightly against his back, the unspoken reassurance anchoring her. When the lead guard opened the gate, Nathan guided her inside, never letting go until the heavy doors of the mansion shut behind them, sealing off the chaos. Elena exhaled a broken sob, collapsing against the nearest wall, her hands trembling too violently to steady. Nathan stepped in front of her immediately, his eyes dark and furious, but not at her. Never at her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now, though still edged with a barely contained rage. She shook her head, unable to speak. Nathan's breath came uneven as he tried to regain composure, but emotion cracked through his control. "Elena, I am so sorry." She stared up at him, tears pooling in her eyes. "This is because of you. Is it not because someone hates you enough to target me?" Nathan's jaw tightened, his gaze falling to the floor as though he could not bear to face the truth written in her eyes. "This should not have touched you," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "None of this should ever touch you." She hugged her arms around her body, feeling small, vulnerable, exposed by lies she had no way to fight. Nathan took a small step toward her, hesitated, then reached out the back of his hand, brushing her cheek so gently it barely registered as touch but somehow anchored her shaking breath. "I swear I will fix this," he murmured, voice thick with remorse. "I will not let anyone harm you again." His words hit her harder than she expected because they carried not just promise but fear, the kind that came from caring too deeply. Nathan exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair, pacing a short, frantic line across the foyer. "They went after you," he whispered again, his voice cracking on the last word like he could not comprehend why anyone would target someone who had done nothing but exist quietly in his orbit. Elena straightened slowly, grounding herself though her body still trembled. "Nathan, this cannot continue," she said softly. "They will twist every moment. They already have." He stopped instantly, turning toward her with a desperation that softened his entire expression. "I know, and that is why you cannot face this alone." He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it felt like a confession. "Elena, you matter to me more than anyone understands, more than I know how to explain." Her breath stilled in her chest, the weight of his words settling like gravity. Outside, the world circled them, hungry for scandal, fueled by lies. Yet inside the mansion something shifted again, something deep and dangerous and tender, because Nathan had not hesitated. He had run to her, he had shielded her, and even now he looked at her as though the idea of losing her was the only true fear he had left. The mansion felt too quiet after the chaos outside, as if every wall had absorbed the shock of what happened. Elena followed Nathan into his private study, her pulse still fluttering painfully in her throat, while Nathan shut the door behind them with a soft click, a sound that somehow felt heavier than the slamming of any gate. He stood there for a long moment, his hand resting against the doorframe, his shoulders rising and falling in uneven breaths, while Elena hovered near the center of the room, unsure where to put herself, unsure how much distance was enough and how much felt like abandonment. Finally, Nathan turned toward her, and the expression on his face was unlike anything she had ever seen from him. Raw, stripped, vulnerable in a way that shook her. "Sit," he said gently, though his voice trembled. She obeyed, lowering herself onto the edge of the leather sofa while Nathan crossed the room and sat across from her. Not behind his desk, not behind barriers, but in an armchair facing her as if he needed to be closer to speak what came next. His elbows rested on his knees, his fingers interlaced tightly, knuckles white as though he had to physically hold himself together to tell the truth. "Elena," he began, and her name sounded like something fragile pressed between his teeth last night. "Today, all of this, you need to understand where it started." She swallowed, nodding though fear pricked at her ribs, not of him but of the pain he clearly carried. Nathan exhaled shakily, eyes drifting to the floor as though the carpet were a map of a past he had tried desperately to bury. "2 years ago," he said, "I was engaged." The words hit the air like a confession dripping with regret. Her name was Madison. We were together for a little over a year. She was warm, charming. Everyone adored her. He lifted his eyes then, and Elena saw devastation hiding under the calm he tried to force into his voice. "I trusted her more than anyone else in my life." He paused, as though the memory clawed at him. "But she was never in love with me. She was in love with the version of me that the public consumed. My wealth, my influence, the image she could build from being with me." Elena felt her chest tighten, but stayed silent, letting him speak at his own pace. Nathan rubbed his thumb against his palm, a nervous motion she had never seen from him before. "When we got engaged, the praise fed her ego, but when the attention shifted toward my work and away from her, she snapped. She leaked private messages, therapy notes, anything she could twist into a narrative of a controlling, abusive partner. She sold it to tabloids for a 6-figure deal." Elena's heart lurched. "You trusted her with something so personal," she whispered. Nathan nodded once, jaw tightening. "I struggle with emotional regulation, not anger, not violence, just overwhelm. Too much touch, too much noise, too much expectation." She knew that. She weaponized it. He blinked rapidly as if fighting memories he wished he could tear out of his own mind. "I went to therapy to learn how to manage it. She used my vulnerability as proof that I was dangerous." Elena felt something hot behind her eyes, a mix of grief and empathy. She wanted to reach for him, but she waited, letting him decide whether he needed space or connection. "The lawsuit that followed," he continued, "forced my company to sever ties temporarily. The media tore me apart. People I thought were my friends disappeared overnight." He let out a bitter breath. Somehow, Madison still spun the narrative into a brand deal. The world applauded her for surviving a monster. Elena's stomach twisted painfully. "Nathan, you are not a monster." He looked at her, then truly looked, and she felt the weight of his pain settle in the space between them. "The hardest part," he whispered, "is that I believed her for a while. That maybe she was right. Maybe something in me is broken." Crack opened in his voice, the first real fracture she had heard from him. "When people approached me after that, even innocently, my body reacted like a wound touched too soon. It was not that I could not bear touch. It was that touch reminded me of every moment she violated my trust." Elena inhaled softly, her heart ripping for him. "And then you came here," he said, his voice quieting. "Someone who treated everyone with kindness, with patience. Someone who was not afraid to speak up even in rooms where you were not meant to be seen. Someone who accidentally fell into my arms on your first day." A faint, pained smile touched his lips. "I should have stepped away. I should have put up the same walls I did with everyone else. But I did not. Because when you touched me, Elena, my body did not recoil. It remembered something it had not felt in years. Safety, warmth." Her breath caught. Nathan leaned back slightly, shoulders dropping in defeat. "That is why I panicked. Why I kissed you then pushed you away. Why seeing you hurt today made me feel something I cannot control. Elena, each moment with you pulls apart the walls I built to survive." His confession settled over her in a warm, heartbreaking wave. After a long moment, Elena spoke, her voice soft, steady. "Nathan, what she did to you was a violation, not a reflection of your worth. You are not unlovable. You are not broken. You are wounded, and wounds heal. Nathan's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his eyes searching hers as if bracing for judgment that never came. Elena continued more firmly. "This time, you told me not to disappear, so do not disappear either. Let me stay if you want me to." Nathan's breath hitched, and for a second she feared he might retreat again, but instead, something inside him gave way, his expression softening into something fragile and deeply human. He rose from the armchair slowly, as though approaching a scared animal, and lowered himself beside her on the sofa, leaving only a breath of space between them. He did not touch her, not yet, but the closeness spoke volumes. "Elena," he murmured, voice rough. "I do not know how to let someone in without ruining everything." She turned her head, meeting his gaze with unwavering clarity. "Then, let me be the first person you learn with." The silence that followed was not empty, but full. Charged alive, a quiet surrender to truth. Nathan inhaled shakily, eyes glistening. Then he whispered the closest thing to acceptance he had ever given anyone. "Stay." Elena reached out carefully, her hand covering his where it rested on his knee, and this time he did not flinch, did not pull away. He let her. And in that simple touch, his entire world shifted just slightly but unmistakably toward healing. The storm outside had quieted by morning, but inside Hale Residence, another kind of storm brewed, one built not from wind or rain, but from fear, whispers, and the weight of decisions that would alter the course of more lives than Elena ever imagined. She awoke early, her mind tender from the truth Nathan had revealed the night before, and as she made her way down the hall to begin her shift, every step felt heavier, more uncertain. She knew the world outside still spun with lies, that reporters still crowded the gates hoping to capture the downfall of a billionaire or the humiliation of a maid, and she knew above all else that nothing between her and Nathan could ever go back to what it was before he told her stay. When she reached the kitchen, the staff stood frozen around the television mounted on the wall, every face pale, every whisper edged with fear. On the screen, a panel of commentators debated the situation with the sharp ease of people who had never known the consequences of their words. A host read aloud an anonymous shareholder letter accusing Nathan of inappropriate relationships with household staff, manipulating company resources, and hiding misconduct behind his wealth. Elena felt nausea twist her stomach, and Patricia looked at her with pity, not cruelty, but pity, which somehow hurt more. "He would never," Patricia murmured, but she did not sound certain enough to silence the others. Elena opened her mouth to defend him again, but before she could speak, an alarmed hush swept through the room. Nathan stood in the doorway. He wore a charcoal suit, shoulders squared, expression unreadable, but something simmered beneath the surface, contained but dangerous, like a fault line waiting to rupture. Silence devoured the kitchen. His gaze did not linger on the screen, yet everyone felt the gravity of his presence. Elena's heart pressed painfully against her ribs, knowing what he faced today, what he was walking into, and how much it cost him to stand upright after everything he had confessed the night before. Nathan's voice cut through the stillness. "Elena, I need you to come with me." The staff turned, eyes widening as though witnessing something forbidden unfolding before them. Elena nodded, swallowing her nerves, and followed him out of the room. They walked toward his private elevator side by side, yet not touching, though she sensed the tension radiating from him with every step. When the doors closed and the elevator began its ascent, Nathan finally spoke, his voice low. "You should not have to see what is coming." She turned to him quietly but firmly. "I am not leaving." He looked at her, the smallest flicker of emotion loosening the rigid set of his jaw. They reached the top floor, where the boardroom awaited, a glass-walled chamber overlooking Malibu, the morning sun spilling gold across the polished table. Inside, the members of the Hale Technologies board sat stiffly in their tailored suits, eyes sharp with judgment or fear or ambition, depending on who Elena looked at. Elena hovered near the door, unsure where to stand, until Nathan gestured subtly for her to remain beside him, his silent insistence steadying her. A gray-haired board member cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, thank you for coming on short notice." Nathan responded coolly. "I did not have a choice, did I?" Another board member, a tall woman in navy, leaned forward, her voice calm but laced with accusation. "The situation has grown beyond what the company can ignore. We have media pressures, shareholder concerns, employee unrest, and already 3 major clients have requested clarification on these new allegations." She paused, her gaze flicking toward Elena like she was a live grenade someone had placed in the room. "For the integrity of this company, we need to address the matter of Miss Brooks." Elena's breath caught. Nathan's body went still. The woman continued, "We request that you suspend her from her position until this dies down. It would demonstrate good faith, restore confidence, and protect both the company and yourself." Elena felt her world sway, her throat tightening as every pair of eyes turned on her, accusing, questioning, measuring her worth against the empire Nathan had built. She forced herself to breathe, but it felt like the air was thinning, like she was shrinking under the weight of assumptions she had not invited, and a rumor she could not escape. Nathan rose slowly from his seat, his chair scraping lightly against the floor, and she felt something ripple through the room. The air shifting, the board stiffening as though sensing the approach of a seismic wave. Elena felt panic spark inside her even before he spoke, because she knew what this meant: the risk, the cost, the danger. Nathan's voice emerged calm, steady, deadly. "She stays." The silence that followed cracked like glass. The woman in navy blinked, startled. "Surely you understand the optics here?" Nathan nodded. "I do, and that is precisely why I will not punish an innocent employee to protect optics." Another board member interjected. "You are compromising your leadership position. If the press believes you are involved with her, it places the entire company at risk." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Then let them believe what they want." Gasps rippled across the table. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. Nathan continued, voice firm enough to cut through steel. "Anyone here who has a problem with Miss Brooks remaining in this house? This company or my life is welcome to resign." The words dropped like detonators. The board sputtered protests overlapping in chaos, but Nathan raised a hand and the room obeyed its instinct to fall silent. "Let me make something clear," he said. "I will not allow anyone to target her for their own agenda. Not shareholders, not the media, not this board. If she goes, I go." Elena's knees nearly gave out. The board members stared at him, horrified, calculating, or speechless as the weight of his ultimatum crashed through every person in the room. After a tense stretch of silence, a reluctant agreement formed in their expressions: not approval, not support, but surrender. Nathan had drawn a line, and they knew crossing it would cost them too much. The meeting adjourned with stiff mutters and uneasy glances, and when the last of the board members filed out, Nathan finally exhaled, tension bleeding from his shoulders. Elena stood frozen, gripping the back of a chair, her breath uneven. Nathan turned toward her, his expression softening immediately. "I told you," he murmured, "you are not alone. Not anymore." She shook her head, whispering, "Nathan, you did not have to risk everything." He stepped closer, his gaze steady, unwavering. "Yes, I did. Because losing you, even to fear, would be worse than anything they could take from me." His confession settled between them, warm, dangerous, and beautiful. And in that moment, Elena realized that whatever had begun the day she fell into his lap, whatever fragile thread connected them, had grown into something Nathan Hale, a man who feared closeness, was finally willing to claim in the full light of day. The boardroom confrontation lingered in Elena's mind long after everyone had left, as though Nathan's words were still echoing through her bones, reshaping everything she thought she understood about him, about herself, about the impossible space they occupied together. She followed him down the hallway, their steps quiet on the polished floors, the ocean glittering beyond the enormous windows, but inside her chest a storm churned, pulling her in 2 directions at once. When they reached the foyer, Elena stopped, unable to hold the weight of her emotions any longer. "Nathan," she said softly, her voice trembling, "you risked everything for me. He turned immediately, his expression tightening with concern, but she lifted a hand, a small plea for distance. She needed to speak without interruption, without being disarmed by the raw tenderness in his eyes. "You should not have done that," she whispered. "Your company, your reputation, your future, they were all on the line." Nathan's brow furrowed as if he could not comprehend how she did not see what was obvious to him. "I did it because you matter," he said simply. Too simply. Her breath faltered. "That is exactly why I cannot stay," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. Nathan went still as though her sentence had become a blade lodged in his chest. Elena continued fighting tears. "I never wanted to be a burden or a weakness people can exploit against you. Everywhere you go now, people will talk. They will twist everything. Someone like you cannot afford someone like me in your life." The silence that followed felt like the world holding its breath. Nathan stepped toward her slowly. Each movement, careful, weighted with emotion. "Elena, look at me." She refused, turning her head away because looking at him felt like giving in, and she could not trust herself near the gravity of his presence. He gently touched her arm, his fingers barely brushing her skin, but even that slight contact pulled tears to her eyes. "Please," he whispered, "do not do this." But she pulled away, stepping back, and the moment the space widened between them, something in his expression fractured tiny cracks spreading across his usually unreadable composure. Elena's voice came out barely audible. "I need to leave the residence." Nathan inhaled sharply. Not in anger, but in devastation. His lips parted as though he wanted to beg her to stay, but instead he said something that hurt even more softly. "If you walk out that door, I will not stop you." It took everything inside her not to collapse. So she did the only thing she could. She turned away, packed her small bag, avoided the staff's pity-filled glances, and walked toward the service exit, her chest aching so fiercely it felt hard to breathe. She pushed the door open, and the afternoon light struck her eyes, sharp, bright, unkind. But before she could take another step, she heard him. "Elena!" The single word shattered her resolve. She froze her hand, still clutching the doorknob, her shoulders trembling. He stepped out onto the stone path, rain clouds gathering overhead, the air thick with a storm that had not yet broken. His hair was wind-tousled his tie, loosening as though he had run to catch her. He looked nothing like the untouchable billionaire the world claimed he was. He looked like a man losing something he could not bear to lose. Elena turned slowly, and their eyes met, and in that split second she saw everything he had never said written plainly across his face. Fear, hope, longing, desperation, and a love he had not yet dared to name. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Do not you dare leave, you." Rain began to fall, sudden, soft, cold drops scattering across the ground as Nathan took a few steps toward her, his expression raw. "Elena, if you walk away now, I will let you go. Because I know what it feels like to be trapped, but I will lose something I will never get back." She shook her head, tears mixing with the rain. "Nathan, I cannot be the reason your world falls apart." He stopped inches from her, rain darkening his shirt, clinging to his frame, his breathing unsteady. "You are the only part of my world that has not fallen apart," he said. Lightning flashed far in the distance, thunder rolling like a warning echo, but neither of them moved. Elena's heart pounded, aching with how much she wanted to believe him, how much she feared it. Nathan continued, his voice breaking. "I have spent years trying not to feel anything because feeling hurt too much and trusting was dangerous, and letting someone in nearly destroyed me." His hand shook slightly as he lifted it, reaching toward her but stopping just before touching her cheek, giving her the choice. "But you, Elena, you make me feel safe. You make me want to try again. You make me believe I can be more than what my past broke in me." A choked breath escaped her lips. He continued, "I am not asking you to stay, because I need you to save me. I am asking you to stay, because I love you." The words hung in the rain between them, heavy, beautiful, impossible. Elena's tears fell freely now, her resolve crumbling like sand in a tide. Nathan took the final step, closing the distance, his forehead lowering toward hers, his voice trembling. "Please stay. Not because of the company, not because of the rumors. Stay, because every morning I wake up hoping to see you. Stay, because I have not felt like myself in years until you walked into my life. Stay, because you are the first person I have let touch me without fear, and the last person I want to lose." Something inside her broke open, releasing all the fear, all the longing, all the love she had tried to bury. She reached up, cupping his face gently, her thumbs brushing his rain-damp cheeks. Nathan exhaled a shaky breath, leaning into her touch as though it were the first real warmth he had felt in years. Elena whispered, her voice trembling, "I love you too." The confession felt like stepping into sunlight after living in darkness. Nathan's eyes closed, relief crashing through him in a visible wave. Then he kissed her, not with hesitation, not with fear, but with a certainty that ignited every emotion they had buried. The rain poured harder, drenching them both as he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against him, not possessively but desperately, as though she were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. She kissed him back, pouring every unspoken feeling into the moment, and for the first time the world felt quiet. No cameras, no boardrooms, no rumors, just them. Two broken people who had found something whole in each other. When they finally pulled apart, Nathan rested his forehead against hers, whispering, "You are not leaving. Not again. Not ever." And this time she whispered back, "I am not going anywhere." 1 year later, the Hale residence no longer felt like a fortress sealed behind fear and silence, but a home humming with warmth and quiet purpose, and Elena walked through its bright hallways each morning with a steadiness she once never imagined she could possess. The world outside had changed too. Scandals dissolved in the wind when truth surfaced. New shareholders replaced the old, and Hale Technologies rebounded stronger than before, but the biggest transformation had not been in the company or in public perception, it had been in Nathan himself. He stood now at the center of his rebuilt empire, not as a man hiding behind barriers, but as someone who had learned slowly, painfully, beautifully, how to let himself feel again. Elena paused at the doorway of the new workspace Nathan had created specifically for their joint project, a cultural development program designed to reshape workplace mental health across the industry. Something he said he never would have dared to build without her influence. She smiled as she stepped inside, scanning the rows of mood-friendly lighting soft chairs, nature-toned decor and walls lined with employee wellness plans she had helped design. She had long since left her position as a maid and now served as the head of culture and human integration in Nathan's new subsidiary. A role he insisted was perfect for her because she understood people in ways he was still learning. The staff adored her. Stakeholders respected her. And Nathan loved her openly now, without hesitation. As she walked deeper into the room, she saw him through the glass partition sitting at the long oak table, reviewing documents, his hair slightly tousled, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled above his forearms. A year ago, this sight would have intimidated her. But now she felt only a soft rush of affection, the kind that grew from patience and storms weathered together. Nathan looked up, sensing her before hearing her footsteps. Something he did often, as though attuned to her presence in a way that felt unspoken and natural. A slow, warm smile curved his lips. "Elena, good timing. I was just thinking about you." She crossed the room, setting her notebook beside his papers, leaning slightly against the table while studying him with a fondness she no longer hid. Thinking good things or stressful ones, she teased. His smile deepened, mostly good. He rose from his chair, walking around the table until he stood in front of her, close enough that she felt the comforting heat of him and the familiar steadiness in his eyes. "Today is a big day," he murmured. She nodded. It was the official launch of their culture initiative, something dozens of employees and therapists had worked on for months. But beneath the excitement, Elena noticed a subtle flicker of nervous anticipation in Nathan's expression, something that did not quite match the project. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then let out a small breath more vulnerable than she expected. "Actually, there is something I wanted to show you before the event." He gently reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers, a gesture he now gave easily without fear, as though time and love had rewired the part of him that once recoiled from any touch at all. They walked together through the west wing toward the library, the place where everything had started, where she had fallen into his lap, quite literally and unknowingly into his guarded heart. Elena felt a small laugh rise in her chest, remembering that day. The robot vacuum. The shock, the tension, the accidental closeness, the whispered plea, "Do not you dare leave," the moment that had baffled her for weeks until she understood what it truly meant. Nathan opened the library door and motioned for her to step in first. She did, and then froze. The room had been rearranged subtly yet purposefully. The central leather sofa moved to one side. 2 chairs angled near the fireplace, and in the middle of the rug sat the robot vacuum, positioned deliberately facing the wrong direction. Elena covered her mouth, laughter and emotion bubbling together. Nathan stepped behind her, his voice warm, low, amused. "I thought we should recreate the moment that changed everything." She turned to him, her eyes shining. "You did this on purpose." He nodded gently. Setting the robot like that was harder than fixing the company scandal. Elena laughed until tears pricked her eyes, the kind of tears that came from joy, from healing, from memories turned sweet instead of painful. Nathan reached for her waist, pulling her a little closer, his hands confident, now steady in ways that would have terrified him a year ago. He whispered, "Fall again. I will always catch you." Her breath hitched as she looked into his eyes, soft and certain, filled with the kind of love that had grown through fire and storms and vulnerability, not fantasy. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his, a gesture that had become a quiet language between them. "You already did," she murmured. "I keep falling for you every day." Nathan exhaled a tremor of emotion, then slipped one hand into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box, dark navy, with a simple silver clasp. Elena's heart stopped. Nathan opened it, revealing a ring, elegant, not extravagant, the kind of beauty found in intention rather than price. A thin, platinum band encircled a single oval diamond framed with 2 tiny stones, symbolizing past, present, future interlinked. Elena lifted a trembling hand to her lips, tears now spilling freely. Nathan sank to one knee, not theatrically but gently, as though lowering himself into a memory, a promise, a lifetime. "Elena Brooks," he said, voice soft, steady, and full of devotion. "You walked into my home, and unknowingly into the darkest part of my life. You saw me when I could not see myself. You stayed when it would have been easier to run. You taught me how to feel again, how to trust again, how to love without fear." He swallowed emotion, tightening his voice. "I do not want another day in this world without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Elena let out a shaky laugh that broke into a sob of joy. "Yes. God, yes." Nathan rose, pulling her into his arms, kissing her with the tenderness of every moment that had brought them here. Every fear they had conquered, every part of himself he had learned to offer her without hesitation. When they finally pulled apart, the robot vacuum bumped gently against Nathan's shoe as though impatient to fulfill its ceremonial duty. Elena laughed through tears, and Nathan smiled, whispering looks like fate approves. She kissed him again, knowing this time nothing and no one would pull them apart. And as sunlight poured across the library floor, illuminating the room where their story began, Elena realized something with quiet certainty: the fall that once terrified her had built a future stronger than either of them had imagined. If you are still here listening to this story, then maybe like Elena, you believe that even the most unexpected fall can change a life forever. And maybe like Nathan, you understand how hard it is to trust again after being broken, and yet you kept listening because some part of you still believes in second chances in love that heals in imperfect people, choosing each other anyway. If this story touched your heart even just a little, I want to invite you to take a moment and breathe in everything you just felt. The fear, the tenderness, the longing, the courage, the quiet victories that happen not in headlines, but in the small decisions that shape who we are. Stories like this are not really about billionaires or mansions or scandals, they are about what we all crave. Deep down, someone who sees us, someone who chooses us, someone who stays when things get dark. And if you felt that in this story, then you are officially part of this channel's family. The place where love is not perfect, but it is real. Now, before you go, I want to ask you something directly. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Was it the moment Elena fell into Nathan's lap the first time fate pushed them closer than either expected? Was it when he whispered, "Do not you dare leave," without even knowing why those words escaped him? Was it the night he finally broke and she touched his hand without fear? Or was it that final moment in the library a year later when he recreated the fall just to remind her that he would always catch her? Tell me in the comments, I genuinely want to know, because every time you share your favorite moment it tells me what kind of stories speak to your heart, what you want more of, what makes you stay until the very end. And if you are listening to this from somewhere far away, maybe curled up on your couch, maybe on a late-night drive, maybe during a quiet moment in your day, let me know where you are watching from. This channel has so many beautiful souls from all over the world, and it warms my heart every single time to see cities, states, and countries appear in the comments. Whether you are from New York or Texas or the Philippines or New Zealand or anywhere at all, your voice matters here. And if you are someone who has ever been afraid to love again or afraid to let someone close, I hope this story reminded you gently that healing is possible, connection is possible, and love, even the unlikely kind, can find you in the most unexpected places. So, if you enjoyed this story and want more like it, do not forget to hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join me for the next journey. We tell stories here that do more than entertain. They make you feel seen. They make you believe again. They make you wonder what might happen if you let someone in, maybe just a little. And finally, I want to leave you with a question, one that Elena and Nathan had to ask themselves too. What would you do if someone looked at you with the kind of love that terrified you but also made you feel alive? Would you stay? Would you run? Or would you take the risk and fall, knowing someone might catch you? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for being here, for sharing your time, your heart, and your curiosity. I will see you in the next story.